What if reality has more rooms than we've been taught to enter? Picture an ordinary evening. A kitchen light hums. A neighbor's dog barks once and falls quiet. Somewhere, a phone vibrates against a table, demanding attention. The world feels solid and agreed upon. 3 dimensions, one timeline, one you. And yet, for as long as humans have kept records, we've also kept a second kind of record. Stories about places you can't reach by walking, and knowledge you can't learn by reading. Not fantasies, exactly, more like recurring rumors of the mind. In temples and laboratories, in monasteries and military offices, people have asked a similar question with different words. Is consciousness just a candle trapped in the skull, or is it a lantern that can throw light beyond the body's walls? If you change the conditions, silenced the senses, slowed the breath, tuned the brain, would the lantern reveal corridors no one notices in daylight? This documentary isn't a promise. It's an exploration. Across the past century, the vocabulary changed. Mystics spoke of astral travel. Physicists spoke of probability and interpretation. Psychologists spoke of altered states. Neuroscientists spoke of neural networks and oscillations. The labels evolved, but the human impulse stayed familiar: to test the boundary between what we experience and what might exist beyond experience. And in that impulse, there is both wonder and risk. Because the mind is not a neutral instrument. It can magnify truth. It can also manufacture it. Memory, especially, is a sculptor that keeps working even after the moment has passed. We know this from everyday life, how two siblings remember the same childhood differently, how a scent can summon a scene that never happened quite the way we swear it did. So when people describe hidden dimensions, we have to hold two ideas at once. First, the possibility that reality is larger than our senses. Second, the certainty that our senses and our stories can mislead us. The tension between those two ideas will be our compass. The phrase hidden dimensions can mean many things. Sometimes it points toward mathematics, extra dimensions theorized in physics, compact and invisible, curled tighter than anything we can imagine. Sometimes it points towards psychology, inner dimensions of attention, perception, and interpretation. Sometimes it points toward the borderlands where science, belief, and experience overlap, where a person claims they saw a distant place while their body remained still, where another says they felt the future before it arrived, where someone in a hospital bed insists healing began the moment they stopped fighting and started listening. Our task is not to declare these accounts true or false like a courtroom verdict. Our task is to follow them like a trail through fog, noticing what's consistent, what's contradictory, and what these stories reveal about the human longing to know. Because whether these dimensions are external realms or internal capacities, they change the same thing: the way a person understands being alive. If consciousness can, even occasionally, access information beyond ordinary perception, then our map of reality is incomplete. And if it cannot, if the mind is merely an exquisite storyteller, then we still have a mystery, because the storyteller's power is profound. A brain that can generate worlds, selves, and futures is not small. It is a kind of universe of its own. Over the next chapters, we'll move through 10 recurring rooms in this larger house of possibility. We'll meet the idea of an astral overlay, the sense that awareness can detach from place. We'll step into the probability room, where reality forks into maybes. We'll approach an information realm, imagined as a library beyond the page. We'll enter the healing template, a notion that the body remembers a better version of itself. We'll walk the hallway of time, where past and future feel less like a line and more like a landscape. We'll visit parallel Earths as a metaphor and as a hypothesis. We'll explore collective intelligence, where minds seem to synchronize. We'll confront the seductive dream of reality programming, the belief that the world is editable if you find the right code. And we'll end at the most radical claim of all, a source layer where creation itself begins. At every stop, we'll ask the same gentle question: what is being reported, and what might it mean? Not a hunt for secrets, a study of the human relationship with the unknown. Because the unknown isn't only out there, it's in here, inside the mind that wants certainty, and inside the heart that keeps reaching anyway. So let's begin with the oldest doorway, the one that opens when the body stays behind, and awareness imagines it can travel. The room some call the Astral Dimension. If it's only a dream, why does it return across cultures and decades with such stubborn clarity? And if it's something more, what does it say about who we are? Creatures of flesh, yes, but perhaps also creatures of reach? What if your mind could leave the room without your body ever standing up? In the early 1970s, in an America tense with uncertainty and rivalry, a quieter kind of experiment began behind sealed doors. Not rockets, not radar, something stranger. An attempt to treat consciousness as a tool that could be trained, aimed, and deployed. The premise was almost disarmingly simple. A person sits in a chair, eyes closed, breath steady, the body is still. And yet the person is asked to go somewhere, across a city, across an ocean, into a building they've never seen, to describe what is there as if sight were no longer tethered to the eyes. Researchers used careful language when they could, and coded language when they had to. They spoke of a parallel layer of perception. They called it an astral dimension, or a non-local field, or simply remote viewing. Names changed depending on who was listening. The aim did not: to test whether awareness could travel faster than any vehicle, passing through walls and distance as though they were thin as paper. If you've ever had the sensation of thinking of someone and then receiving their call, you already know the emotional texture of the idea. A small crack in the ordinary rules. Most of us dismiss it. A coincidence, we say, and keep moving. But these experiments asked a more uncomfortable question. What if it isn't always coincidence? What if the crack widens under the right conditions? The protocols were built to make coincidence harder. The viewer is kept blind to the target. The target is chosen elsewhere. The viewer records impressions, shapes, textures, temperatures, motion, like a weather report from a place they've never been. Later, those impressions are compared to the real sight. Sometimes the descriptions fell flat, like a dream collapsing in daylight. But sometimes, according to the accounts, details emerged that startled the observers. A structure's outline, a distinctive feature, a hidden object, a location's feel, described with unnerving accuracy. Not perfect, not cinematic, more like fragments that shouldn't have existed at all. This is where mystery begins to take on weight, because a phenomenon doesn't have to be flawless to be real. It only has to be repeatable enough to disturb the assumption that it can't happen. That was the uneasy edge of these sessions, the sense that consciousness might not behave like a private candle, but like a signal capable of reaching beyond its source. Yet this is also where the human mind reveals its double nature. The same imagination that might translate distant information can also invent it. It can turn a blank target into a vivid story. It can fill uncertainty with confident images. The viewer may believe completely and still be wrong. The observer may want a result and unconsciously steer the interpretation. The data can become a mirror, reflecting hopes and fears as much as facts. So the astral dimension in these narratives is never merely a place. It is a test of the most delicate boundary we have, the line between perception and projection. And still, people kept returning to the doorway. Why? Because those who experienced it often described something consistent beneath the details, a sensation of separation, as if awareness loosened from the body's weight, a change in the quality of time, a strange calm, sometimes, like floating on the surface of a dark lake and realizing the lake is not hostile, it's simply vast. They spoke of traveling instantly, of hovering, of moving through structures without resistance. They spoke of locations feeling loud or quiet, as if places carried signatures. And some spoke of an ethical unease, because if the mind can trespass without footsteps, what becomes of privacy? What becomes of consent? The modern listener might want a verdict. Was it real? Was it illusion? Was it a Cold War curiosity inflated by secrecy and ambition? But perhaps the deeper question is subtler. If a government, with all its appetite for advantage, invested in training people to see without seeing, what does that reveal about our collective intuition that the world is larger than it looks? And if the mind can produce convincing travel while the body stays still, what does that reveal about how easily reality is constructed from within? Either way, the astral dimension leaves us with an unsettling possibility. That location might not be the prison we assume it is. So here at the threshold, we pause. If consciousness can roam, even in fragments, what else might it touch? And if it cannot, why does the idea return with such persistence, like a melody heard faintly through a wall, insisting there is another room nearby? What if the world you live in is only one version of what could have happened? Imagine a coin spinning on a tabletop. For a moment, it isn't heads or tails, only motion, an undecided shimmer. Then it falls and the room becomes certain again. Heads, tails, one outcome, one story, one clean line from before to after. But in the deeper language of physics, certainty is not always the default. At the smallest scales, reality behaves less like a single narrative and more like a cloud of possibilities, probabilities that hover until something makes them settle. The mathematics doesn't describe one future marching forward. It describes many futures waiting in line. The unsettling question is what waiting means. Some interpretations of quantum theory suggest that all those alternatives don't vanish when one becomes visible. They continue in parallel, each branch carrying its own version of events. You might not notice them, because you only experience the branch you're on. But in this view, reality is not a single highway. It is a vast delta, splitting and splitting again, forming an ocean of outcomes. To most of us, this sounds like science fiction. A multiverse, parallel worlds, infinite copies of you. But the emotional core of the idea is older than any equation. It's the moment you look back on your life and feel the ghost of a different path. The job you didn't take. The city you didn't move to. The person you didn't call. That sense isn't proof of alternate universes, but it is a lived intuition that life is shaped by branching decisions, by forks whose other roads still haunt our imagination. Here, the hidden dimension isn't a place you travel to. It's a structural claim about reality itself, that the world contains more versions than we can inhabit. And if that's true, if the universe is a branching archive, then a strange bridge appears between physics and psychology, because the mind is also a branching archive. Every memory is a reconstruction. Every identity is a story chosen from countless possible stories. In that way, even without parallel universes, we already live inside a probability engine. But the documentary question is sharper. Could consciousness, in rare conditions, sense the branching? Could it lean into one probability rather than another? Could intuition be a whisper from a nearby branch, an echo of what almost happened? Some people claim they have felt it. They describe moments when reality seemed to shift, a sudden change in atmosphere, a small but unmistakable difference in an otherwise familiar scene, as if the room had been swapped while they blinked. Others speak of déjà vu, not as a glitch, but as a memory of a path that exists somewhere else. Still others speak of dreams that feel like visits, alternate lives lived for a night, then erased by morning. Skeptics point to what we already know. The brain is a pattern machine. It fills gaps. It predicts. It sometimes misfires. Déjà vu can be explained as a timing error, a recognition signal firing without context. Dreams can remix daily fragments into convincing narratives. Perception can change when mood changes. Reality doesn't have to split for the mind to feel split. And yet, the probability dimension remains compelling because it touches something fundamental, the instability of certainty. We want the world to be a stable stage where events happen in a single, reliable order. But the deeper you look, whether into atoms or into memory, the more you encounter layers of ambiguity. Even the most ordinary decisions are made in conditions of partial information. Even the most confident recollections are edited by time. In this way, the probability dimension becomes less about proving parallel universes and more about learning to live with multiplicity. It asks us to accept that what feels inevitable now was once only one option among many. It asks us to see the present as a selection, not a destiny. There's also an ethical undertone here. If reality is a branching structure, then every choice matters not because it locks all other possibilities away, but because it commits you to a particular thread. In a universe of maybes, responsibility becomes the act of choosing with care, because you become the narrator of the branch you inhabit. And if reality is not branching in any literal sense, the lesson still holds. The mind branches. The heart branches. Lives branch through relationships and risks and regrets. The multiverse may be metaphor, but the lived experience of alternatives is real. So we end this chapter with a question that doesn't require a laboratory to feel its weight. If you could stand at one of your life's forks again, if you could step into the version of reality where you chose differently, what would you learn about the person you became? And what does it say about truth, if even the story of you is only one outcome among many that might have been? What if information exists somewhere before it becomes knowledge? There's a certain kind of silence you can hear only in a library, not emptiness, more like a collective hush, as if thousands of pages are holding their breath. Walk between the shelves and you feel it, the strange density of stored human experience, compressed into ink and binding. Everything we've learned, everything we've feared, everything we've dared to imagine, kept in orderly rows as if order could tame it. Now, widen the thought experiment. What if the library isn't only made of paper? Across different eras and disciplines, people have proposed a hidden layer of reality that behaves like an information field, a vast, subtle reservoir where patterns exist before we notice them, where knowledge can be retrieved rather than invented. Some call it an Akashic record, borrowing ancient language for a modern hunger. Others speak in the dialect of systems theory, collective intelligence, or non-local connectivity. In more futuristic terms, it's described like a cosmic internet. The metaphor is seductive because it fits certain human experiences. A composer wakes with a melody fully formed, as if it arrived from elsewhere. A scientist feels a solution assemble itself in the mind before the steps are consciously understood. A grieving person dreams of a loved one with details later discovered to be true. A stranger in a distant city suddenly remembers a name they've never heard, and the name turns out to matter. We can explain much of this without invoking hidden realms. The brain processes in the background. It connects fragments quietly. It detects patterns the conscious mind overlooks. Creativity often feels like receiving because the final product arrives after invisible labor. But the information dimension claims something more, that the mind may access data it did not generate, data not contained in personal memory, not learned through ordinary channels. This is where the phenomenon called remote viewing begins to overlap with a bigger question. The astral dimension asks whether awareness can travel. The information dimension asks whether awareness can tune, like a radio, into signals already present. And tuning implies frequency. In certain training methods, the first instruction is almost always the same. Reduce noise. Slow down. Let the mind become quiet enough to notice impressions that would normally be drowned out by chatter. If an information field exists, it wouldn't announce itself with a trumpet. It would appear as faint texture, a fleeting image, a bodily sensation, a sudden word that feels out of place. The difficulty is that faint texture is also how imagination feels. So practitioners develop rituals of discernment. They write fragments quickly to avoid polishing them into stories. They separate raw impressions from interpretation. They aim for humility, because the moment you become certain, you start forcing. Yet even with discipline, ambiguity remains. A description can be close enough to feel miraculous and still be coincidence. A vague impression can be retrofitted to match a target. The mind is so hungry for meaning that it will weave it from fog. This is why the information dimension is both fascinating and treacherous. It tempts us with the idea that everything is already known somewhere, that uncertainty is only a lack of access, that grief could be eased by retrieving the right message, that the future might be read if we find the right archive, that truth is waiting, complete, beyond the mess of human disagreement. But what if truth isn't a file? What if it's a relationship between observer and world, between memory and moment, between question and patience? In that case, an information field would not remove mystery. It would deepen it, because it would suggest that knowing is not simply collecting facts, but learning how to listen. There's also a quiet humanism here. If information is shared at a deeper level than language, then separation may be less absolute than it feels. We spend our lives inside private skulls, speaking through imperfect words. The idea of an underlying informational unity, whether literal or metaphorical, offers comfort. Perhaps we are connected in ways we can't easily measure. Still, comfort is not evidence. So we hold the idea gently, like a delicate object whose value is not proven by our desire for it. We take seriously the accounts of sudden knowledge, but we also take seriously the mind's capacity to invent. The question becomes not, is there a cosmic library, but what happens to a person when they believe they are reading from one? Sometimes it leads to humility, a sense that the universe is larger than one mind. Sometimes it leads to arrogance, the belief that one person has privileged access to truth. The same doorway can open into wonder or into delusion, depending on the traveler's honesty. So we end in the library's hush, listening for what can't be shelved. If there is an information dimension, it may not be a place we conquer. It may be a place we approach with care, aware that the act of seeking can change what we find. And if there is no such dimension, then the mystery remains inside the brain itself, a biological instrument capable of astonishing leaps, retrieving meaning from scattered fragments as if it were pulling answers from the air. Either way, the question lingers like dust motes in a beam of light. When insight arrives fully formed, is it something we made or something we found? What if healing begins in a place the body can't point to? In a hospital room, time behaves differently. The clock keeps moving, but the minutes don't feel like minutes. A fluorescent light turns every surface the same pale color. Machines speak in small, steady beeps, an artificial heartbeat for the air itself. And in that environment, the body becomes a kind of argument. Numbers and scans, charts and forecasts, probabilities made visible. Yet even there, where medicine is at its most concrete, people tell stories that don't fit neatly into measurements. A patient whose pain eases before the medication should have worked. A wound that closes faster than expected. A person who describes warmth spreading through a limb long before physical therapy begins. A sense, sometimes, of being repaired from somewhere deeper than tissue. Doctors have explanations for much of this, and many of them are beautifully grounded. The immune system is complex. Recovery curves vary. Placebo effects are real and powerful, not because people are foolish, but because expectation and biology are intertwined. Stress hormones rise and fall. Sleep restores. Hope changes the nervous system's tone. The body is not a machine. It is an ecosystem. And still, some experiences leave a residue of mystery. The healing dimension is one of those ideas that straddles the line between physiology and philosophy. It suggests that the body may have an informational blueprint, an underlying pattern of wholeness that can be accessed, influenced, or remembered. In older language, it's the vital force. In modern metaphors, it's the body's operating system. In more speculative frameworks, it's a template layer that shapes the physical form. If you've ever watched a cut seal itself, you already know why this idea feels plausible. Healing is ordinary, but it is also miraculous in the quietest way. Cells coordinate like a choir. Blood vessels rebuild. Skin knits. The body doesn't just endure damage, it organizes a return. The question is whether that organization is only chemical or also informational in a deeper sense. Some practices treat healing as a kind of tuning. They use breath, attention, imagery, and touch to shift the nervous system from fight or flight into repair mode. Others focus on coherence, bringing heart rate, breath, and brain rhythms into a steadier alignment. In those states, people often report a peculiar clarity. Pain becomes less sharp, fear less consuming, and the body feels less like a battlefield and more like a landscape that can be tended. Skeptics say this is simply the parasympathetic nervous system doing its work. And they're not wrong. But naming the mechanism doesn't drain the wonder. If anything, it deepens it, because it means the mind can influence the body not through magic, but through the most intimate channels of biology. Still, the healing dimension goes further. It appears in stories of spontaneous remission, of near-death recoveries, of experiences where a person claims to see their illness as a shape or a shadow and then watch it dissolve. It appears in accounts of distant healing, someone praying or focusing on another person far away, and that person later reporting an unexplained shift. It appears in moments when a patient feels an internal instruction: stop resisting, forgive, release, rest. These accounts are hard to test and easy to romanticize. That's why we tread carefully. Extraordinary recoveries happen, but they are not guarantees, and they are not moral rewards. Illness is not a failure of belief. Healing is not proof of virtue. Any narrative that turns sickness into blame becomes cruelty, dressed as wisdom. A humanistic approach keeps both truths close. The mind can shape experience, and the body remains vulnerable. We can influence outcomes, and we cannot control everything. The healing dimension, then, is not a promise of invincibility. It is an invitation to consider the body as more than an object. Because when people speak of a healing template, they often describe a shift in identity. They stop seeing themselves as a diagnosis and begin seeing themselves as a whole person again, someone with history, relationships, meaning. Sometimes that reorientation is what medicine alone can't provide, a reason to endure the slow work of recovery. And even if the template is metaphor, metaphors matter. They change behavior. They change posture. They change how someone speaks to their own selves, their own pain, their own fear. If a person believes the body remembers wholeness, they may treat themselves with gentleness rather than war. They may rest when they would have pushed. They may ask for help sooner. They may forgive their limitations. Those choices can alter physiology in quiet, cumulative ways. So the healing dimension might be less about supernatural force and more about the deepest partnership we have: attention meeting flesh, meaning meeting biology. But the mystery still breathes beneath the mechanisms. Why does a calming image sometimes change a heartbeat? Why can grief weaken the immune system? Why can connection, being seen, being held, being listened to, change pain in minutes? If the body is only matter, why does it behave like a story? We end here with a question that is both scientific and intimate. When healing happens, what is doing the healing? Just cells and chemicals? Or something like an inner pattern, an organizing intelligence that we can't see but can sometimes feel? And if that pattern exists, is it the body's secret, or the mind's way of learning to live inside it? What if time isn't a river? What if it's a room? Most days, we live as if time moves in one direction, like water running downhill. Morning becomes afternoon. The calendar flips. Photos age from glossy to faded. The body changes quietly in the mirror, and we call it normal because we have no alternative. But then sometimes, time misbehaves. A smell pulls you backward so fast you can't breathe. You're 8 years old again, standing in a doorway, hearing a voice that no longer exists in the world. Or you wake from a dream with your heart racing because it felt like the next day had already happened, down to a phrase someone hasn't spoken yet. Or you have a moment on the highway, a sudden tightening in the chest, and you slow down without knowing why. A second later, a truck swerves where you would have been. These are ordinary stories, shared in quiet tones, often followed by a shrug. Coincidence, imagination, instinct. But taken together, they form a persistent question. Is the mind always locked inside the present, or can it sometimes lean into other parts of the timeline? The time dimension is not necessarily the claim that the future is fixed. It's the claim that the boundary between past, present, and future may be more flexible than our daily experience suggests. In physics, Certain perspectives describe time as another dimension, part of a larger structure where events exist as coordinates. In philosophy, this becomes the block universe idea. The past isn't gone, the future isn't not yet, everything exists, and our consciousness is what moves. Even if you don't accept that literally, you've felt its emotional echo. We carry the past inside us like sediment. We anticipate the future like weather. We don't just live now. We live in a constant braid of memory and expectation. In that sense, the mind already accesses time, but it does so through reconstruction and prediction. The mystery begins when reconstruction and prediction appear too accurate. Some people report premonitions that are not symbolic but specific, an image of a phone call, a phrase, a sudden accident, an unexpected visitor. Others report retrocognition, impressions of the past they claim they could not have known, sometimes linked to a place or an object. A few describe time as something they can enter during altered states, as if consciousness steps sideways and watches life from above, seeing scenes arranged like photographs. Skeptics, again, have strong tools here. Humans are excellent at noticing the hits and forgetting the misses. We dream constantly, and a few dreams will resemble future events just by chance. We make predictions subconsciously based on subtle cues. Our brains are built to model what might happen next, because survival depends on it. But the time dimension refuses to disappear because of a deeper truth. Time is not experienced uniformly. Trauma can freeze it. Grief can distort it. Joy can dissolve it. A single hour can feel like a day. A decade can feel like a blink. Our internal clocks are not clocks at all. They are stories about change. So perhaps the question isn't, can we see the future? But why does time feel so different depending on the state of mind? And if time can be stretched and compressed subjectively, what else might be possible when consciousness shifts? There's a quiet humility in that approach. It doesn't require us to declare prophecy real. It asks us to notice how much of time is already constructed inside the mind. The present is not a pure moment. It's filtered through memory, sensation, and anticipation. We are always slightly ahead of ourselves and slightly behind. That in itself is a hidden dimension, the lived experience of time as layered, not linear. Still, there are moments that feel like more than layering, moments that feel like contact. A person sits by a hospital bed and suddenly knows, with painful certainty, that the end is near, though the monitors haven't changed yet. A parent wakes at 2:17 a.m. and can't sleep, then later learns their child had an accident at that exact time. A friend feels compelled to call someone they haven't spoken to in years, only to learn that the person was about to make a desperate choice. These stories don't prove anything, but they are worth listening to, not as evidence, but as human data, signs of how deeply connected we are to timing, to pattern, to one another. If the universe is a network of events, maybe the mind sometimes senses shifts in that network before the conscious story catches up. Or maybe the mind, when under love or stress, becomes hyper-attuned to subtle signals, tone of voice, recent behavior, the unspoken weight in a relationship, and later narrates that attunement as knowing. Either way, time becomes less like a strict ruler and more like a living fabric. Something we measure, yes, but also something we inhabit. We end in the doorway of the time room, listening for footsteps we can't yet place. If the future can be felt, even faintly, does that mean it already exists somewhere? Or does it mean the mind is simply a remarkable forecasting instrument, writing tomorrow in pencil and sometimes getting it right. And if time is a room, not a river, what does it mean that we spend so much of our lives standing in the doorway, half in what was, half in what might be? What if the world you know is not the only earth that learned to breathe? Stand on a hillside at dusk and watch the lights come on in a city below. From far away, each window looks like a small star, a grid of lives, 1,000 dinners, arguments, lullabies, prayers. It feels singular. This one planet, this one history, this one civilization pressing its fingerprints into stone and glass. But now, imagine the same scene, shifted by a hair's breadth. The skyline is slightly different. One building never existed. One street curves where yours runs straight. A person you loved in this life never met you in that one. In a different branch of reality, a different Earth carries the weight of different choices. The parallel Earth dimension is the most cinematic of these hidden rooms because it gives form to our deepest ache, the feeling that life contains roads we didn't take. Sometimes this idea arrives through physics, through the thought that a universe of probabilities might produce many outcomes at once. Sometimes it arrives through storytelling, novels, films, myths, because the human mind loves mirrors. But sometimes it arrives through experience, in reports that feel less like imagination and more like dislocation. People describe slips. They say they woke up and something in their home was wrong, not in a dramatic way, but in a precise way. A logo they remembered clearly is now different. A memory shared with a friend is denied with absolute confidence. A beloved song has lyrics that don't match the version in their head. These are the small fractures that create a larger question. Did I misremember, or did I move? The simplest answer is usually the truest. Memory is fragile. Perception is fallible. The brain edits details without announcing it. False certainty is one of its most convincing tricks. In that sense, parallel Earth stories can be explained as a psychological phenomenon, an encounter with the fact that we do not store reality like a camera. And yet, there's something humanly important here, even if nothing supernatural is happening. Because when you discover your memory can be wrong, you also discover how much of your identity is built on memory. If the facts wobble, the self wobbles, and that wobble can feel like being moved to another world. So the parallel Earth dimension may be a metaphor that behaves like a symptom. It expresses a real inner experience of disorientation in the face of uncertainty. It says, I can't trust the ground the way I used to. But there is another layer. Some people report alternate life dreams so detailed they feel like memories rather than fantasies. They remember names, jobs, children, streets. They wake with grief for people who don't exist here. A few report a strange longing, as if they left something important behind in a place no map can find. Again, neuroscience can step in. Dreams can simulate entire worlds. The brain can fabricate continuity with astonishing skill. A dream can be emotionally real, even if it isn't factually real. But emotional reality matters. If you wake mourning a child you never had, what does that reveal? It reveals that the heart is not bound by biography. It can attach, love, and lose within imagined worlds. And in that, the parallel Earth concept becomes a mirror for the depth of human attachment, the way we can grieve not only what happened, but what almost happened. There's also a gentler possibility that these stories are the mind's way of processing choice. We rarely see our lives as branching in the moment. We see only the step in front of us. But later, we look back and realize the road turned at a dozen, invisible intersections. Alternate world stories might be how the psyche honors those unseen turns by giving them narrative form. A parallel Earth becomes the stage where the unlived self can exist without threatening the lived one. In that way, other Earths become less about cosmology and more about compassion. They remind us that every person is a bundle of versions, some expressed, some dormant, some abandoned for safety, some sacrificed for love. Not because reality split necessarily, but because the human life is too complex to fit into a single, clean arc. Still, the mystery returns like a tide. If the universe is generous with outcomes, if reality truly branches, then perhaps those alternate versions are not only metaphors, perhaps they exist, silent, inaccessible, yet real, like rooms in a house you will never enter. And if that's true, then regret changes shape. It becomes not a wound, but a recognition. Somewhere another you took the road you didn't. We end with a question that is both tender and unsettling. If parallel Earths are real, does that comfort you, knowing another version of you found the life you missed? Or does it haunt you, knowing that you will never meet them? And if parallel Earths are not real, why does the mind keep building them anyway? Like a lighthouse throwing beams across an ocean of possibility, searching for a shore that might only exist in longing? What if your mind isn't truly private? What if it sometimes joins a larger mind? Picture a flock of birds turning in the sky. No leader announces the movement. No single bird controls the pattern. And yet the whole flock shifts as if it shares one nervous system, one decision, one breath. Humans like to believe we are separate in a stronger way than that. One body, one mind, one interior world, sealed from everyone else. Privacy feels like a law of nature. But then you encounter moments that challenge it. A group falls silent at the same instant, as if someone pulled a cord. Two friends speak the same sentence at the same time and laugh, then pause, because for a second it didn't feel like chance. A mother wakes from sleep with her name on her lips, certain her child needs her, before the phone rings. A room full of strangers claps in perfect rhythm, and something in the chest loosens as if the boundaries of the self have softened. The collective mind dimension is the idea that consciousness can synchronize, that information or emotion can spread not only through words and gestures, but through subtler channels. In older language, it's a shared spirit. In modern language, it's resonance, entrainment, social cognition. In the most speculative versions, it becomes telepathy, mind to mind without a wire. We can explain much of this through what we already know. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to cues, micro-expressions, breath, posture, tone. We predict one another constantly. We mirror without realizing it. In groups, nervous systems can align like metronomes placed on the same table. And still, the question remains, is that all it is? Because sometimes the synchronization feels like more than reading cues. People describe sudden knowing that arrives with no visible prompt. They describe feeling another person's pain from far away. They describe dreams where a friend appears with a message that later proves relevant. They describe creative teams where ideas seem to arrive at multiple minds at once, as if the concept was waiting nearby and the group simply pulled it into the room. Here is the tension we have to honor. Groups can generate extraordinary intelligence, shared focus, shared motivation, shared insight, but groups can also generate illusion. A crowd can become a single mind in the worst way, amplifying fear, simplifying truth, punishing nuance. The same synchronization that creates beauty can also create harm. So the collective dimension has an ethical edge. If minds can align, then influence becomes a kind of gravity. It raises the stakes of what we say, what we repeat, what we reward. It means that our inner climate affects the climate around us, even when we think we're keeping it contained. It means attention is not neutral. It spreads. In this light, collective consciousness becomes less a paranormal claim and more a human fact. We are shaped by one another at every moment. Our beliefs are contagious. Our moods are contagious. Our courage is contagious. Our cruelty is contagious too. But there is also tenderness here. If we are connected, then loneliness is not only a personal problem, it is a fracture in the network. If we are connected, then kindness is not small. It is structural. It changes what is possible for everyone nearby. And if connection runs deeper than language, then perhaps empathy is not merely imagination. Perhaps it is a faint form of perception. Still, we must be careful not to romanticize. Feeling connected does not make a person infallible. Shared knowing can be projection. Intuition can be mistaken. And the hunger for belonging can create false certainty faster than any evidence can correct it. So we approach the collective mind dimension the way you approach a campfire in the dark, close enough to feel its warmth, far enough to respect its power. The question we carry forward is quiet but persistent. When you feel another person inside your own experience, when grief, joy, or insight seems to pass between you without words, is that proof of a hidden channel in reality? Or is it proof of something equally astonishing, that the human nervous system was built to be porous, and that the self, for all its walls, is designed to let the world in? What if the world responds to you more than you think, but not in the way you want? There's a temptation, especially in uncertain times, to believe that reality is negotiable if you find the right lever, that the universe is a kind of interactive screen, that thoughts are commands, that intention is code. If you just focus hard enough, speak clearly enough, visualize vividly enough, the world will rearrange itself to match your desire. This is the reality programming dimension, the idea that consciousness doesn't merely observe reality, it edits it. It shows up in many forms: manifestation culture, affirmations, vision boards, mind over matter folklore, and the most confident claim of all, that you can write your future like software. Some versions sound soft and self-helpful. Others turn rigid and absolute, promising certainty in exchange for belief. The human appeal is obvious. We want agency. We want to feel that our lives aren't governed entirely by randomness, institutions, biology, or luck. We want to believe we can influence outcomes beyond the narrow range of our hands. And in a limited way, we can. Your expectations shape your behavior. Your behavior shapes your choices. Your choices shape your environment. If you believe you're capable, you may take risks you would otherwise avoid. If you believe the world is hostile, you may interpret neutral events as threats and respond accordingly. If you rehearse success, you might practice longer, speak more clearly, persist through failure. The mind doesn't need supernatural powers to change reality. It needs only to change the person acting within it. But the programming dimension becomes dangerous when it forgets this distinction. It can imply that illness is a failure of imagination, that poverty is a failure of vibration, that tragedy is attracted by negative thought. It can turn compassion into judgment and complexity into blame. It can make people feel responsible for events they could never control and guilty for pain they did not choose. A humanistic approach keeps the power without the cruelty. Yes, attention matters. Yes, belief shapes action. Yes, internal stories can be rewritten. But the world is also full of forces outside the self: chance, history, biology, other people's decisions, accidents, systems built long before you were born. Reality is not a vending machine. It does not owe us outcomes because we asked politely. Still, the reality programming idea isn't entirely wrong. It's just often misapplied. If you look closely, the mind does appear to interact with reality in a feedback loop. You notice what you're primed to notice. You remember what matches your story. You interpret ambiguous events through the lens of your mood. Psychologists call some of this selective attention and confirmation bias, but those clinical terms don't cancel the lived truth. Your inner state changes what the outer world looks like. In that sense, the dimension here may be the space between perception and fact, the layer where meaning is assigned. Think of it like this: the world offers raw material, and the mind turns it into a narrative. Two people walk the same street and inhabit different cities because their interpretations differ. One sees danger everywhere, the other sees possibility. One sees rejection, the other sees neutrality. The external data may be similar, the internal rendering is not. So when people say they shifted reality, they may be describing a real shift in rendering. The world didn't change, their relationship to it did. And that change can be transformative. There's a deeper truth beneath the hype. You can't always control what happens, but you can often influence what it becomes inside you. That's not cosmic power. That's human resilience. And it's a dimension we can access without denying complexity. But there's still mystery at the edges. Some reports go beyond psychology. People describe improbable sequences of synchronicities after setting intentions, meetings, opportunities, coincidences that feel orchestrated. Skeptics point to pattern-seeking and probability. Yet even if it's probability, the experience can still be meaningful. A coincidence can change a life. A chance encounter can alter a trajectory. Meaning doesn't require design. It requires impact. So perhaps the reality programming dimension isn't about bending the universe. Perhaps it's about learning how the mind and the world co-create a life, how choice and chance weave together. We end with a question meant to keep you honest and hopeful at once. If you cannot program reality like a machine, what can you program? Your attention, your habits, your interpretations, your willingness to act, your capacity to forgive and to begin again. And if those are the only levers you truly have, could it be that they're enough to change the shape of your days, even when the universe refuses to change on command? What if the deepest layer of reality isn't matter, but pattern? If you've ever watched a crystal form, you've seen order emerge without a planner. Given the right conditions, molecules arrange themselves into geometry as if they remember a design. Snowflakes grow into symmetry. Sand, under vibration, creates intricate shapes. A violin string hums, and invisible waves draw visible form. It's hard not to feel the pull of a larger question. Is reality built from stuff or from structure? The source layer dimension is the most abstract of the hidden rooms, and in some ways, the most intimate. It suggests that behind everything we can touch, behind matter, behind energy, there may be a foundational level where reality begins as information, relationship, or law. Not a bearded creator in the clouds, not a conspiracy. Something quieter, an underlying code of coherence that generates worlds the way mathematics generates music. In spiritual traditions, this is described as the ground of being, the unnameable origin, the place where form rises from emptiness. In modern metaphors, It's described like a simulations engine, a cosmic algorithm, a field of potential. In philosophy, it becomes a debate about whether the universe is fundamentally physical or fundamentally mathematical. But for our purposes, the source layer matters not because we can prove it, but because people report experiences that feel like contact with it. During deep meditation, some describe dissolving boundaries, no self, no time, only awareness. Others describe hearing a hum beneath reality, like standing near a massive generator. Some describe moments of awe so intense the world feels newly made, as if the veil of familiarity lifted and the raw fact of existence became luminous. Again, psychology can speak here. Altered states can change perception dramatically. The sense of self is a constructed process. It can fade. The brain can generate unity experiences. But even if the experience is neurological, it is still meaningful, because it reveals that our normal sense of separation is not the only way a human mind can be configured. So the source layer dimension may be less about cosmic secrets and more about humility. It asks, what if the real world is not the one we're used to, but the one we can barely perceive because we're too busy surviving? In this frame, the previous dimensions begin to look like different angles on the same mystery. The astral dimension, a feeling that awareness can detach from location. The probability dimension, a sense that outcomes are not singular. The information field, the intuition that knowledge can be found. The healing template, the belief that the body is organized by deeper patterns. The time room, the suspicion that the timeline is not simply a line. The parallel Earths, the ache of alternate lives. The collective mind, the resonance between people. Reality programming, the feedback loop between belief and action. All of them, in their own way, point toward a question about the architecture of experience. But the source layer is where architecture becomes origin. It suggests a foundational canvas where possibilities exist before they become events. And here, we must be careful not to fall into grand claims. The temptation is to say, everything is one, and treat that as an answer. But one can become a slogan that erases suffering, difference, and responsibility. A humanistic approach lets unity be a feeling, not a weapon. Because if there is a source layer, it does not excuse cruelty, it does not cancel grief, it does not make injustice unreal. It doesn't replace the hard work of being human. Instead, it offers a kind of perspective. It says, you are not only the story you tell yourself on the surface, you are also the awareness beneath the story. The world is not only the objects you can name, it is also the relationships between them. And perhaps, at the deepest level, reality is less like a collection of things and more like a living system of patterns. This perspective can soften fear. If the self is not as solid as it feels, then losing control might be less catastrophic. If reality is patterned, then chaos might be a phase, not a final verdict. If consciousness can touch something quieter than thought, then peace might not depend entirely on circumstance. But the source layer can also sharpen responsibility. If everything is interconnected, then every action ripples. If the world is patterned, then what you repeat, what you practice, what you reward, becomes part of the design. The source layer isn't a place you escape to. It's a reminder that you're already participating in creation, moment by moment, through your choices. So we end at the edge of the deepest room, where language begins to fail. If reality arises from a source layer of pattern and potential, what is consciousness? Is it a product of the universe, an emergent feature of matter? Or is it something like a window into the source itself, a way the universe becomes aware of its own design? And if you could touch that layer, even for a second, beyond name, beyond fear, what would you bring back into your ordinary life? What if the strangest dimension is the one you carry everywhere, memory itself? A photograph looks like proof until you realize how easily it lies. Not deliberately, not maliciously, just quietly, in the way a frame excludes more than it includes. The smiling faces at the edge of a wedding picture don't reveal the argument in the car. The bright vacation sunset doesn't show the loneliness that followed. A still image freezes a moment, and we mistake the freeze for the truth. Memory works the same way, except the camera is inside the mind. We like to think of memory as a vault, facts stored, sealed, retrievable. But memory is closer to a theater. Each time you recall a moment, you rebuild it. Lighting, sound, emotion, meaning, using whatever you are now. The past isn't only remembered, it's reperformed. And sometimes, without meaning to, we rewrite the script. This is the memory dimension, a hidden room that doesn't require a mystical doorway. You enter it every day. The moment you say, "I remember," you step into a space where reality and interpretation overlap. And the overlap matters because memory is not just about the past. It shapes the future. It tells you who you are. It decides what you fear, what you trust, what you expect from love, what you believe you deserve. In that sense, memory is a form of time travel, one that changes the traveler. So why include memory in a story about hidden dimensions? Because memory is the bridge that determines what we call real. When someone reports an astral journey, a premonition, a shared knowing, or a reality shift, we receive it through memory, through narrative, through the mind's ability to stitch sensations into meaning. Even when the experience is profound, it becomes story the moment it's told, and story is shaped by what the mind can hold. This doesn't diminish the experiences. It clarifies the stakes. If memory is fluid, then certainty becomes fragile. Two people can witness the same event and tell two different truths. A person can be utterly sincere and still be inaccurate. A mind can protect itself by altering details, softening pain, sharpening blame, or blurring what it cannot bear. Sometimes the alteration is gentle. Sometimes it's devastating. Trauma can fracture memory into scattered images and bodily reactions because the mind prioritizes survival over coherent narrative. Grief can rearrange the past, coloring it with regret or idealization. Repetition can harden a story until it feels like fact. Even love can edit memory, polishing the beloved, smoothing sharp edges, creating a version that is easier to hold. In this way, memory becomes a dimension where reality is negotiated, not recorded. And here is the unsettling twist. The more confident you feel, the less reliable you might be. Confidence is not always truth. It's often the mind's decision to stop searching. Certainty can be a comfort, a closure. But closure sometimes comes at the cost of accuracy. So the memory dimension teaches a kind of humility that every other dimension requires. If you cannot fully trust your recollection of yesterday, how do you evaluate a claim about other realms? Not by dismissing it, not by worshipping it, by holding it with two hands, curiosity and caution. Yet memory is not only a source of error, it is also a source of meaning. Our lives would be unlivable without the mind's storytelling power. Memory gives continuity. It allows learning. It makes intimacy possible, because to love someone is to build a shared archive, a private history, a web of moments you return to together. And sometimes, memory performs miracles of its own. A person remembers a kindness at the moment they are tempted to give up. A voice from childhood returns years later as guidance. A forgotten song appears in the mind and becomes a lifeline. These are not supernatural events, but they are dimensional in the sense that they expand the present. They bring other times into now, and they change what now can be. So the memory dimension is both our greatest limitation and our greatest gift. It is the reason we can be deceived and the reason we can be redeemed. We end with an open question meant to follow you beyond this chapter. If your mind is constantly rewriting the past, who are you? Are you the events that happened, fixed and unchanging? Or are you the meaning you make of them, evolving with every retelling? And if truth lives somewhere between memory and reality, how do we learn to live tenderly, honestly, inside that uncertain space? What if the hidden dimensions aren't out there? What if they are ways of seeing? There's a moment that happens sometimes in the mountains when fog lifts just enough to reveal a ridgeline. Before the lift, the world feels small, only what you can see in front of you. After the lift, the landscape becomes vast, layered, almost impossible to hold in a single glance. Nothing new was created. The ridge was always there, only the conditions changed. This is the quiet possibility at the center of every dimension we've explored, that the universe might not need secret doors so much as different kinds of attention, that what we call hidden may be less about distance and more about resolution, what the mind can perceive when it's tuned differently. In this chapter, we gather the threads and ask, what do these dimensions have in common? Astral travel describes awareness loosened from location. Probability describes reality as branching potential. The information field suggests knowledge as something you can retrieve. Healing frames the body as guided by deeper patterns. Time becomes a space you inhabit, not just a line you follow. Parallel Earths express the ache of alternate lives. Collective mind points to resonance and shared states. Reality programming reveals the feedback loop between belief and action. The source layer imagines an origin of pattern beneath matter. And memory reminds us how fragile and powerful our inner archives are. On the surface, these ideas conflict. Some sound scientific, some sound mystical, some sound like metaphor dressed as theory. Yet the emotional core is consistent. They all begin with dissatisfaction with a flat world, a world where the self is sealed, where the present is all you have, where death is a hard end, where knowledge must be earned slowly and painfully, where healing is random, where loneliness is absolute, where the universe is indifferent and silent. Hidden dimension stories push back against that. They say maybe there is more connection, more possibility, more meaning, more room. But the danger is also consistent. When people crave more, they can become vulnerable to certainty that isn't earned. They can mistake feeling for fact. They can replace nuance with grand narratives. They can chase secret knowledge and lose the simple, grounded wisdom of ordinary life. So the question becomes, how do you hold wonder without losing your footing? One answer is to treat these dimensions as lenses rather than territories, as ways of organizing experience that can be psychologically useful, ethically clarifying, or spiritually nourishing, even if they are not literally measurable. Consider the astral dimension as a lens for detachment, the ability to step back from immediate sensation and observe the mind. Consider the probability dimension as a lens for choice, the recognition that the future is not fixed and that your actions shape which outcomes become real. Consider the information field as a lens for creativity, the experience of insight arriving when you stop forcing. Consider healing as a lens for partnership, the body and mind in conversation, not in war. Consider time as a lens for presence, the skill of not being dragged entirely into past or future. Consider parallel Earths as a lens for compassion, the understanding that every person contains unlived versions of themselves. Consider collective mind as a lens for responsibility. Your inner state affects others. Consider reality programming as a lens for agency. You can shape your life by shaping your attention. Consider the source layer as a lens for humility. Beneath your story is something quieter. Even if you reject every paranormal claim, these lenses can still change how you live. And if you accept that some of these phenomena might be more than metaphor, the lenses become even more important because they keep you grounded. They remind you that mystery is not a license for certainty. It's a call for carefulness. There is a mature wonder that doesn't shout. It listens. It tests. It notices its own bias. It allows the possibility of being wrong. It honors the difference between "I felt something" and "I know what it was." It holds the human experience as data, without turning data into dogma. In that spirit, we can say something simple. These dimensions, whether literal or symbolic, reveal the same human truth. We are meaning-making creatures standing inside a universe we do not fully understand. Our senses capture only a slice. Our memory edits. Our cultures hand us frameworks. Our science improves the map. But the map is not the territory. And every once in a while, someone has an experience that feels like the fog lifting, like the world expanding, like the ridgeline appearing. Whether that ridge is really there in an objective sense may be the wrong first question. The first question might be, what does the experience change? Does it make the person kinder or crueler, more humble or more arrogant, more grounded or more detached from reality? Does it help them face mortality, repair relationships, endure illness, forgive themselves? Or does it trap them in obsession, paranoia, superiority? In the end, the ethical test matters as much as the factual one. We end with a question meant to be practical as well as philosophical. If reality has hidden dimensions, the most important one might be the dimension of discernment, the ability to hold mystery without being owned by it. How do you train that? By staying curious, by staying kind, by staying willing to revise your story when new evidence arrives, by remembering that the world is wide, but the human heart is what decides what we do with what we discover. So as we move toward our final chapter, we ask, if the universe is larger than it looks, what kind of person do we want to be inside that larger space? What if the final dimension is not a place, but a responsibility? There's a moment in every long journey when the traveler realizes the destination isn't the point. The point is what the journey revealed about them, the parts of themselves they didn't notice until the road demanded honesty. If these hidden dimensions are real in any literal sense, then they imply an expanded universe, consciousness that can reach, time that can bend, information that can be accessed, reality that can branch. But if they are not literal, if they are metaphors shaped by culture, psychology, and longing, then they still imply something profound. The human mind is a world in itself, and we are responsible for how we inhabit it. Either way, responsibility becomes the final dimension. Because every extraordinary claim, every story of access beyond the senses invites a choice. How will we use what we think we know? If a person believes they can see beyond walls, will they respect the dignity of others? If a person believes their thoughts shape the world, will they use that belief to blame the suffering or to strengthen their courage? If someone feels connected to a collective mind, will they become more compassionate or more controlling? If someone believes in a source layer of unity, will they honor difference or erase it? Hidden dimension narratives often begin with wonder, but they can end in ego. The mind loves to feel special. It loves to feel chosen. It loves the intoxication of secret knowledge. But mature wonder is different. Mature wonder doesn't make you bigger. It makes you smaller in the healthiest way, aware of how much you don't know and how careful you must be with what you claim. It replaces the hunger for certainty with the patience for inquiry. So let's revisit what we have learned through the lens of responsibility. The astral dimension taught us that travel can be an experience even if it isn't a physical fact. Responsibility there means humility, acknowledging the difference between vivid perception and verified reality, and resisting the urge to trespass, whether spiritually, psychologically, or ethically. The probability dimension taught us that life is shaped by forks. Responsibility there means choice, understanding that even if the universe branches, you still live in one branch, and your actions shape its moral texture. The information field taught us that insight can arrive like a gift. Responsibility there means discernment, not turning intuition into authority and not using knowing to escape the discipline of evidence. The healing template taught us that mind and body are intertwined. Responsibility there means compassion, refusing to weaponize belief against the sick, and using hope as support rather than judgment. The time room taught us that the present is porous. Responsibility there means presence, not obsessing over tomorrow's shadows and not being trapped by yesterday's echoes. Parallel Earths taught us about the ache of unlived lives. Responsibility there means acceptance, letting alternate versions of yourself become lessons rather than prisons. The collective mind taught us that we are contagious. Responsibility there means care, choosing what you amplify, what you repeat, what you bring into the shared emotional atmosphere. Reality programming taught us that belief shapes behavior. Responsibility there means agency with honesty, changing what you can, releasing what you cannot, and refusing to turn the world's complexity into a personal scoreboard. The source layer taught us about pattern beneath things. Responsibility there means reverence without escape, letting awe deepen your ethics rather than dissolve them. And the memory dimension taught us that truth is fragile inside the mind. Responsibility there means gentleness toward your own recollections, toward other people's stories, toward the fact that we are all narrators with imperfect tapes. If there's a single thread running through all of this, it's the need to stay human. Not a hero, not a prophet, not a debunker, not a believer looking for applause. A human being facing the same facts everyone faces: uncertainty, mortality, love, loss, and the desire to make meaning. The universe in every era has been too large for any one map. We build models, religious, scientific, artistic, because we need a way to orient ourselves. And each model, if held rigidly, becomes a cage. But if held lightly, it becomes a compass. So perhaps the hidden dimensions are not destinations at all. Perhaps they are reminders that reality can be approached from more than one angle, and that each angle comes with obligations to truth, to kindness, to restraint. This is why The final dimension is responsibility. It is the dimension that decides whether wonder becomes wisdom. We end this chapter with an open question that belongs to every listener, not just the mystic or the skeptic. If you discovered tomorrow, beyond doubt, that reality is larger than the senses can measure, what would you do differently? Would you love more carefully, forgive more quickly, speak more honestly, pay attention to the quiet lives around you, choose less fear, carry less certainty? And if you never receive that proof, if the universe remains silent, can you still live as if the world is sacred enough to deserve your best self? Because that, in the end, might be the only dimension that truly matters. What if the greatest hidden dimension is the space between what we know and how we live? At the end of a long story, the temptation is to tie everything into a clean knot, to offer a final answer, to say, yes, the mind can travel, time can bend, reality can branch, and knowledge can be retrieved from a place beyond. Or to say the opposite, no, it's all imagination, pattern-seeking, and wishful thinking. But a human life isn't lived in clean knots. It's lived in uncertainty, in partial evidence, in moments that feel meaningful even when they can't be proven. It's lived in the quiet minutes between news headlines. It's lived in the space between a medical diagnosis and the will to keep going. It's lived in a relationship where you can't fully know another person, yet you choose to love them anyway. So the conclusion of this journey is not a verdict, it's a practice. We set out with a question about hidden dimensions we can actually access, layers of experience that seem to sit just beyond ordinary perception. We walked through accounts of astral travel, where awareness feels unbound from place. We wandered the probability landscape, where outcomes hover like options in the dark. We entered the metaphor of a cosmic library, where insight arrives as if retrieved. We considered healing as a template, where the body's return to wholeness feels guided by deeper order. We stepped into time as a room where past and future press against the present. We stared at parallel Earths, the haunting mirror of roads not taken. We listened for a collective mind, where emotions and ideas synchronize like a flock, turning at once. We examined reality programming, where belief shapes behavior and perception in powerful loops. We approached a source layer, where pattern seems more fundamental than things, and we honored memory as the hidden dimension beneath all claims, the theater where experience becomes story. Through all of it, one truth stayed steady. The unknown is not an enemy, it's a companion. The unknown keeps us honest. It prevents arrogance from hardening into cruelty. It keeps curiosity alive. It reminds us that the world is larger than our explanations and that other people's inner lives are deeper than we assume. It gives us room to revise, to learn, to soften. In a culture that rewards certainty and speed, mystery can feel like weakness. But mystery is also maturity. It's the willingness to say, I don't know, without shutting down the search. It's the ability to hold wonder without turning it into ideology. So what do we do with these hidden dimensions now that the tour is over? We do something surprisingly ordinary. We pay attention. We notice how our minds construct reality through memory and expectation. We notice how our bodies respond to stress and kindness. We notice how groups influence our mood, and how our mood influences groups. We notice how often we mistake our interpretations for facts. We notice the small moments of intuition, and we treat them as invitations to curiosity, not proof of superiority. We also practice discernment. We can be open without being gullible. We can respect unusual experiences without turning them into absolute doctrine. We can honor scientific rigor without using it to mock the human hunger for meaning. We can hold the poetic and the practical in the same hands. And perhaps most importantly, we practice empathy, because whether hidden dimensions are literal or metaphorical, they remind us of the same thing. Every person is living inside a reality you cannot fully see. Each of us is navigating our own time room, carrying our own memory theater, branching through our own probabilities, tuning into our own fragile signals of hope. When someone tells you a story of something unexplainable, you don't have to accept it as fact to accept it as human. You can ask gently, what did it change in you? What did it teach you? What did it cost you? How did it make you live? In the end, perhaps the most accessible hidden dimension is the ethical one, the realm where knowledge becomes choice. Because even if the universe contains infinite rooms, you still wake up in this one. You still have to decide how to speak to the people you love, how to treat strangers, how to carry grief, how to handle power, how to respond to fear, how to tell the truth when it's uncomfortable, how to stay tender in a world that can make tenderness feel risky. So we close not with an answer, but with a question meant to echo after the music fades. If reality is larger than it appears, will you use that thought to escape the world, or to inhabit it more fully? And if reality is exactly as it appears, will you still live as if it's worth protecting? This one fragile planet, these brief lives, this narrow window of time where we can see, feel, and choose. Because whatever the hidden dimensions are, one thing is certain: you are here. And what you do with here may be the most profound mystery of all.